Hello everyone, my name is Eric. I'm a medical student at the University of Melbourne. In this video, I'll be discussing 3 books that I love reading over the month of June, with some notable mentions at the end. As usual, timestamps will be in the description below. Let's get started. Without question, the book that I've reread the most amount of times is The Little Prince. To give a very brief overview, The Little Prince begins with a pilot who's been stranded in the Sahara Desert. And there the pilot meets a little prince, and over time they begin to have some conversations, and through them we begin to see more of the little prince's background and his worldview. I have to admit, for a long time I thought The Little Prince was a children's book, but the more I reread this book, the more I realized that it's actually quite deeply philosophical, and there are lessons in here for people from all different backgrounds. This book touches on themes such as ego, absurdism, love, and the human condition. And in one of my favorite quotes from this passage actually comes from a fox, where the fox is talking to the little prince, and the fox says, "Now here is my secret, very simply. You can only see things clearly with your heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye." And this quote I thought was a really powerful reminder to not judge things at face value, that to really get to know someone or to know something, you have to connect with them at an emotional level. That whole idea of empathy being the highest form of human knowledge. There are so many little short quotes like this across the book, which I completely missed when I first read it, but the more I reread, the more I began to appreciate. So yeah, as you can see, this book is really short. You can read it within an hour or two, and this book, if I could only recommend one book to all people, I would say The Little Prince is one of those books. I think there is something for everyone in this book. So yes, that is the first book in this list, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I've heard the Why-Not Bird Chronicle being described as an acid trip for adults, and I would say that's a pretty accurate description. Not that I've tried acid before, but for anyone familiar with Murakami, you know that he writes in the brand of surrealism and magic realism, meaning that his novels tend to take on like a dreamlike state, where you as a reader kind of just pulled along on a journey, not necessarily knowing what's happening. There have been other books that have made me feel this way, like The Three-Body Problem and Life of Pi, but I'll say this book is potentially one of the most potent books that I've ever read that gets you to this kind of acid trip. So to give a very brief overview, the book begins with a man named Toru, whose cat has recently disappeared. And that kind of begins a string of strange occurrences, starting with his wife, who becomes more distant from him, and then there are a lot of other characters that enter the mix, such as a teenage girl that lives around him, a war veteran, and also his wife's brother, who is very influential in the political sphere. And throughout all this, the story takes on, I think, like 10 different dimensions and shapes, and as a reader, you're kind of just left exploring these very interesting characters and seeing how they fit together. Most books, I find, tend to funnel in, meaning that the further you get along the book, the more problems and seem to resolve. Like, you find out more that really gives a solution to, say, a problem. But in this book, I would say the Why-Not Bird actually funnels out, meaning that the characters and the events that happen don't necessarily resolve anything that's happened before. In contrast, they actually tend to complicate things and add different layers of meaning to it. And I found that to be a little bit distressing at times, because I wasn't sure what was happening. But I think the best way to read this book is to kind of just let it happen and don't think too much about it. And I think that makes for a very intriguing reading experience. So yeah, if anyone is interested in a literary acid trip, I would highly recommend The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. The way Murakami writes is very engrossing. It can just take you out of reality so quickly, and yeah, I would highly recommend this book. So that is the second book of this list, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Murakami. The White Tiger is the winner of the 2008 Man Booker Prize and tells a dark but kind of humorous story of India's struggle in a globalized world. The book is told through a series of letters written by a man called Balram, who refers to himself as the White Tiger. And these letters are sent to the Chinese premier who is visiting India around that time. Through these letters, we see that Balram grew up in the low caste society of India, where he initially worked in a tea shop, but later learns how to drive and becomes a driver for a wealthy landlord. And the majority of the book takes place around this driving experience, where Balram ends up in New Delhi. I'm really asking a lot of questions and finding out more about what's happening there. So I think this book, I really enjoy this book because Balram is a very interesting character. From the get-go, you see that he's very intelligent and he's really trying to find out some answers to a lot of the questions that are surrounding him. And there's always this underlying mystery as you're reading, which is how exactly did Balram come up from the low caste system in India to become very wealthy and to become an entrepreneur. So on the surface, this book seems like a very general, man's search for freedom kind of book, but I was very impressed by the amount of themes that this book was able to cover. It touches on themes such as poverty, on loyalty, on individualism, on globalization, and the way Aravind Agita writes is very compelling as well, almost like a semi-acid trip in a sense. And when I started this book, it was very, very difficult to put down. So yeah, I have to thank my friend Lynn for recommending this book, and this is the third book of this list, The White Tiger by Aravind Agita. I was lucky enough to read a lot of interesting books in June, so I quickly just wanted to share two more here. The first is Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe, and this book really challenges the notion of the hunter-gatherer label for pre-colonial Aboriginal Australians. Through this book, the author presents a lot of compelling evidence that suggests that Aboriginal Australians were actually very sophisticated, with very complex methods of irrigation and farming and other examples. I think this is a very powerful and influential book for anyone who's interested in finding out about Australia's history. Thank you to my friend Anna for recommending this book. It was very interesting. And the second book I quickly want to mention is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is a kind of dark but fascinating novel exploring the philosophy of absurdism, which is kind of talking about that conflict between a person's desire to find meaning in a world that can sometimes seem quite meaningless. And so through this book, we explore that kind of notion through the main character. And it is really a book that is very thought-provoking, and I have to thank my friend Young for recommending this book. So yeah, that's finally all the books out of the way. Let's end the video. I've been reading a bit of fiction over the month of June, and I have to admit, it sometimes makes you feel a little bit guilty for reading fiction, because one could argue that you're not really learning as much in fiction as in non-fiction. However, I've come to the belief that fiction does change you, but in a more subtle way. Through books like The Little Prince or The White Tiger, you don't just see concepts like loyalty, like absurdism, like love, but you actually feel them in like a very visceral way. And that feeling is really extraordinary, and it really shakes you to your core, I find. So in that way, I think fiction has a really important way to really shape how people view the world. So yeah, that's just my closing thought. If you are interested in some of my thoughts on some of these books, I do write some of them in the form of an online journal, which I'll share in the link, which I'll put in the description below. But otherwise, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for making it this far. As usual, I'll be looking to continue this video series over the next few months. So if there are any book recommendations, feel free to send me a message or to just comment down below. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.